As we begin, we would like to acknowledge that this service is being held by a community that gathers on the stolen traditional lands of the Massachusetts, Nipmuc, Pawtucket, and Wampanoag people. We pay respect to those Indigenous peoples who lost their lives in the colonization of this land, and recognize that these Indigenous tribes are still today facing violations of sovereignty, territory, and water. We also give thanks for the earth we walk upon, the waters, the life-giving plants, and all the earth's creatures, as well as the winds, sun, moon, and stars. We recognize this is just a first step in moving toward right relationship with Native peoples and healing of the earth. Good morning.
Good morning.
Welcome to the First Parish Church of Stone Acton, a welcoming and spiritual community. My name is Joan McKnight and I serve on the Worship Committee. For those visiting FPC for the first time, we welcome you. Please let us know you are here by filling out one of our visitor information cards in the pews and hand it to an usher, drop it in the plate or hand it to Meg, our welcoming staff member. Our minister, staff and board are listed on the front of the order of service. Please feel free to ask me or any of these people for more information. If you would like a large print order of service or hymnal or an assisted listening device, please ask our ushers. Our assisted listening devices are small radios which anyone is welcome to use. After the service, please join us for coffee and conversation in our fellowship hall, which is one level down at the other end of our building, or in a breakout room if you are joining us online. I'd like to draw your attention to the announcements in our order of service, and I have a special announcement today. We welcome our special musicians today, John Russell and Solon Gordon. They are sharing pieces from their concert this afternoon at 4, which is happening right here in our sanctuary. Tickets are for sale at coffee hour after church and at the door. Music will include pieces by Poulenc, Samuel Coleridge-Taylor, and a piece that John wrote himself after being inspired by the courage and resolve of the Ukrainian people. The concert will benefit the Interfaith Partnership for Refugee Resettlement and help them support a Rohingya family moving to Lowell. I hope you can make it. At this time, I would like to welcome our guest minister today, the Reverend Alice Anacheka Naisman. Reverend Alice is the minister of the Unitarian Church of Marlborough and Hudson, where she has served in different capacities for 19 years. She lives in Hudson with her husband, Alan, their 2 young adult children, and their dog and cat. Welcome, Reverend Alice. And now let us come together for a time of community, singing, and worship. Just tell me when to start. Okay. You are beloved and you are welcome here.
Whether tears have fallen from your eyes this past week or gleeful laughter has spilled out of your smiling mouth.
You are beloved and you're welcome here.
Whether you are feeling brave or brokenhearted, defiant or defeated, fearsome or fearful.
You are beloved and you're welcome here.
Whether you have untold stories buried deep inside or stories that have been forced beyond the edges of comfort.
You are beloved and you're welcome here.
Whether you have made promises, broken promises, or are renewing your promises.
You are beloved and you're welcome here.
Whatever is on your heart, however it is with your soul in this moment.
You are beloved and you're welcome here.
In this space of welcome and acceptance, commitment and recommitment, of covenant and connection, let us worship together. We light the chalice with these words by the Reverend Paul Sprecher. Someone is. We light this chalice in memory of the courage of those who have struggled for freedom, the persistence of those who've struggled for justice, and the love of those who've built beloved communities to carry on the light of hope. I invite you to rise in body and or spirit for the hymn number 168, which is in the gray hymnals, One More Step. please remain standing for our unison covenant and affirmation. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another.
This is the time in our service when we share our joys and sorrows. My name is Anne Sadler, and I'm one of the lay ministers. And we're going to start by sharing ones that I've received online. Then we'll go to the sanctuary, and following that to people who are on the computers. We'll light one last candle for all the joys and sorrows that we hold in our hearts but haven't chosen to share.
Let's join our hearts together in a time of prayer and meditation. Spirit of life and love, we are here because we believe what we do matters. We are here because we believe how we live our lives matters. That with every act of kindness or meanness, courage or fear, love or hate, we are weaving the fabric of the universe that holds us all. We are here because we need encouragement, because we need strength, because so often we get distracted. We get in a rush, we don't think. We choose the easy way when the harder path is what our spirits are truly longing for. We are here because none of us is perfect, but together we inspire one another to try again, to take another step. We are here because we have felt the stirrings of love and grace in our hearts and our hands, and we crave more of that. For ourselves, and not only for ourselves, for everyone. We are here because how we live matters. Amen, blessed be, may it ever be so. And I invite you now to join in singing the hymn, Spirit of Life, number 123.
Oh Oh, the pastor has a nice ledge that I can stand on so I can actually see over the microphone. This is awesome. Good morning. My name is Lisa Fagerstrom, and with Katie Weeks, I co-chair the Racial Justice Task Force, and I'd like to introduce our plate chair for this month, the I can always, UUUM, the Unitarian Universalist Urban Ministry. Thank you. I got all those out. You can read about this, and I really want to point you to your bulletin where you have a description of the urban ministry. And this church has done a lot of work through the urban ministry, particularly I think when Ziola was here, he was on the board, one of our former pastors. That was before my time, but I've heard tell, and a lot of work with this organization. Our Racial Justice Task Force is working to rekindle a deeper relationship with the group and to have real relationship with folks that are served in the greater Boston area, and particularly in the area of Roxbury and Dorchester through UUUM. And that's really wonderful to have that time, and we've sponsored some trips down there and some different things, and we will continue to do that. Their mission their mission and vision here is in the bulletin, and I encourage you to think about this and hold this in your heart as the work that we do as you use and as this church. The mission is to work across race and place to dismantle racism and white supremacy culture, as well as to advance racial, economic, and social justice. And the vision is to envision a greater Boston where all people live with freedom and dignity and have equitable access to resources and opportunity to shape the present and the future. So we want to be a part of that. We want to be physically a part of that, having relationships. And the reality is all the other things that happen there on a day-to-day basis take money. So this is why the plate sharing. So we encourage you to do all sorts of things, to have a ministry of presence with UUUM as we go through this and attend some of the things we're inviting you to and the different programs that are there. But also during this month to donate generously to this, because the work is amazing. And sadly, the work continues every day. Thank you. And now we will gather in our tithes, our offerings, and our plate sharing.
Beautiful. Thank you. I do want to share that it is a joy to be here with you all this morning. I have preached here before. It's been some years, although earlier this fall, of course. But it is nice to come back and to see more and more familiar faces after the various collaborations our congregations have been having. So it is truly lovely to be here among you this morning. I share with you this reading from the memoirs of the late, great Representative John Lewis. About 15 of us children were outside at my Aunt Seneva's house, playing in her dirt yard. The sky began clouding over. The wind started picking up. Lightning flashed far off in the distance, and suddenly I wasn't thinking about playing anymore. I was terrified. Aunt Seneva was the only adult around, and as the sky blackened and the wind grew stronger, she herded us all inside. Her house was not the biggest place around, and it seemed even smaller with so many children squeezed inside. Small and surprisingly quiet. All of the shouting and the laughter that had been going on earlier outside had stopped. The wind was howling now, and the house was starting to shake. We were scared. Even Aunt Seneva was scared. And then it got worse. Now the house was beginning to sway. The wood plank flooring beneath us began to bend. And then a corner of the room started lifting up. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. None of us could. This storm was actually pulling the house toward the sky with us in it. That was when Aunt Seneva told us to clasp hands. Line up and hold hands, she said, and we did as we were told. Then she had us walk as a group toward the corner of the room that was rising. From the kitchen to the front of the house we walked, the wind screaming outside, sheets of rain beating on the tin roof. Then we walked back in the other direction as another end of the house began to lift. And so it went, back and forth, 15 children walking with the wind, holding that trembling house down with the weight of our small bodies. More than half a century has passed since that day, and it has struck me more than once over these many years that our society is not unlike those children in that house, rocked again and again by the winds of one storm or another, the walls around us seeming at times as if they might fly apart. It seemed that way in the 1960s, at the height of the civil rights movement, when America itself felt as if it might burst at the seams. So much tension, so many storms. But the people of conscience never left the house. They never ran away. They stayed. They came together and they did the best that they could, clasping hands and moving toward the corner of the house that was the weakest. And then another corner would lift and we would go there. And eventually, inevitably, the storm would settle and the house would still stand. But we knew another storm would come and we would have to do it all over again. And we did. And we still do. All of us, you and I, children holding hands, walking with the wind. I invite you all to join me in singing the song, I Choose Love. This song was written in response to the tragic mass shooting at the Emmanuel AME Church in Charleston, South Carolina in 2015, in which 9 African Americans were killed during Bible study and a 10th was injured. The music is on the reverse of your order of service.
In the
The Reverend Olympia Brown, before she was the Reverend Olympia Brown, was turned down by the first theological school that she applied to. This was 1861. They didn't admit women, and she was told so. She was turned down by the second theological school and the third. Rejection followed rejection, and yet she kept applying anyway. She was clear in her heart that she was called to be a Universalist minister. Then finally, she received a letter from the president of St. Lawrence Universalist Theological School. She had been admitted. She began to make her plans. A few months later, she received another letter from the president. In this one, he outlined all the difficulties she would experience as the only woman in the school. She was the first woman to be admitted and would likely be the last, he told her. I don't think women are called to be ministers, he said, but that's ultimately between you and the great head of the Christian church. When Brown arrived to enroll in her first semester of classes, she introduced herself to the president. I really was not expecting you, Mrs. Brown, he said. I thought my letter would discourage you. Despite the taunts of two of her classmates, Brown went on to become the first woman officially ordained within a denomination, the Universalist denomination. Each time that she went to apply to a congregation to be their minister, some members of the congregation would greet her with a certain amount of disdain. But each time they gave her the opportunity to preach one sermon and prove herself. And each time after that sermon, they called her with enthusiasm. Throughout her ministry, Brown became a champion of women's rights. In particular, she wrote and preached and lectured about the right to vote. When she was in her early 30s, Susan B. Anthony asked Brown to go to Kansas for a 6-week campaign for enfranchisement. Kansas had 2 amendments under consideration, the right for black men to vote and the right for women to vote. Susan B. Anthony encouraged her to go, describing easy travels to speak before eager crowds. Both women thought the amendment was sure to pass. Though the crowds were, in fact, hospitable, the travel was definitely not easy. Brown would wake up at 4 in the morning, eat a quick breakfast, and travel by carriage for 8 to 10 hours on hot, dry, dusty, unpaved roads. Sometimes she had her own bed, sometimes she shared with a child, sometimes she slept in blankets on the floor. In the end, the amendment was voted down. Brown returned to her parish. After 24 years of a successful ministry, Susan B. Anthony convinced Brown to become a full-time lecturer for women's rights. For decades, she worked for this cause. In addition to Kansas, she traveled throughout Wisconsin, Ohio, South Dakota, Washington, Minnesota, Illinois, and Iowa. She spoke at conventions in New York, Boston, and Washington, D.C. Still, the vote wasn't passed. At the age of 82, Brown joined hundreds of women picketing President Wilson, who was opposed to suffrage. In snow and in rain, the women stood outside the White House from 10 o'clock in the morning to 5:30 in the evening every day for 3 months. In 1918, after the end of World War I, the women turned to Wilson to direct Congress to pass women's voting rights. He did nothing, and instead he got ready for a trip to France to take part in peace talks. To protest Wilson's inaction, 400 women walked together to Lafayette Park and lit a fire. One by one, they burned Wilson's books and speeches about liberty, freedom, and democracy. The crowd cheered as Olympia Brown climbed up to the fire and threw in the speech that Wilson had made upon arriving in France. She said, "America has fought for France and the common cause of liberty. I have fought for liberty for 70 years, and I protest against the president's leaving our country with this old fight here unwon." When he returned to the United States, Wilson reconsidered his positions, and finally, the House of Representatives voted to give women the right to vote. On November 2nd of 1920, at the age of 85, after a lifetime of work, Olympia Brown went to the polls and cast her first vote. As we take a moment to reflect on and honor the Reverend Olympia Brown's story, I invite you to join in a sung response and sing verse 1 of I Choose Love, "In the Midst of Pain." Congressman John Robert Lewis got his earliest practice as a public speaker on the Alabama farm that he grew up on. He was in charge of the chickens, and he got very attached to those chickens. He preached to them, he tried to baptize a few, and whenever a chicken died by natural causes, he would do a memorial service. And he struggled when they died from unnatural causes and ended up as Sunday dinner. Little did his family know that this was a precursor to his leadership in the civil rights movement, starting in 1959 when he was only 19 years old, and continuing for more than 60 years until his death in 2020. Nelson Mandela once said, "But I have discovered the secret, that after climbing a great hill, one only finds that there are many more hills to climb." This has indeed been the case for civil rights and voting rights and racial justice work in this country. As a college student, Lewis organized and participated in sit-ins to protest segregated lunch counters. He stood in long movie lines to buy tickets he knew would never be sold to him. And when they refused him the ticket, he and each activist after him would just go back to the end of the line and try again. He participated in the Freedom Rides, integrating buses and driving them into segregated towns in the South. At the age of 23, he was one of the organizers and speakers at the famous March on Washington. He marched across the Edmund Pettus Bridge in the march from Selma to Montgomery, Bloody Sunday. Lunch counter by lunch counter, movie theater by movie theater, integration won the day, but not quickly and not without tremendous struggle and violence. Lewis believed firmly in the principle of nonviolent resistance. He became extremely involved with the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee and ultimately became their chair for several years. As part of that group, he was trained in nonviolent tactics. They hurled insults at each other, threw water on each other, threatened each other, all as practice for maintaining composure for the real harassments and violence that they knew that they would face. Lewis's parents were terrified by his actions. Growing up, he'd been taught to stay out of the way, keep out of trouble. Now he was insisting on doing just the opposite, getting in the way, putting his life in danger when he did so. Protesters were beaten by mobs while the police watched, or beaten by the police officers themselves. Crosses and buses were burned, homes were attacked, students had water sprayed on them or ketchup dumped on their heads as they sat at lunch counters. Activists disappeared. Peaceful demonstrators were arrested for things like asking to go in the front door of the courthouse to register to vote. In just one summer in Mississippi, known as Freedom Summer, there were 1,010 arrests, 35 shootings, 35 church burnings, and 30 bombings. Doctors who did physicals on the student activists described their condition after that summer as battle fatigue. Over the course of his life, Lewis was arrested 45 times, including 5 times as a congressman, protesting apartheid, genocide, and advocating for immigrant rights. In one arrest, the guards threatened the inmates with taking their mattresses if they kept singing their freedom songs. Soon, they were left with the hard, cold floors, still singing. More than once, Lewis thought that he was about to die. Once in a lunch counter sit-in after he and other protesters were fumigated with the chemicals used to poison rats. And another time when he was viciously beaten while kneeling in prayer on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, and his blood from a head wound joined the blood of so many others on Bloody Sunday. Somehow, Lewis persisted. In reflecting on his past, he said, "I cannot explain it. It's impossible for me to say why and how I got involved with the cause and the movement. I happen to believe that maybe there's something in the universe, or maybe the environment, or maybe the spirit of history, and you have to allow yourself to be used." As we take a moment to reflect on and honor Representative John Lewis's story, I invite you to join in a sung response and sing verse 3 of I Choose Love, "When My World Falls Down." At the age of 23, Julia Hill wanted nothing more than to travel the world. So when a neighbor invited her on a road trip from their home in Arkansas to California, she jumped at the chance. A detour took them to see the redwoods. Hill ran into the forest to commune with the ancient trees. She had an experience so profound that she went home to Arkansas, sold everything she had, and used the money to purchase a tent, a backpack, and a sleeping bag. She returned to California. The plan wasn't clear. She just felt compelled to help efforts to save the redwoods from unsustainable logging practices. Hill went to join the activists working to save the trees, but it was the late fall. She soon learned that they were breaking down base camp for the winter. "We don't need you," they said. She went to the base camp anyway. There she had her lucky break. They needed someone to tree sit for 5 days in a 1,000-year-old tree named Luna. Luna had the big blue X that meant it was scheduled to be cut down any day. Hill signed on. With very little training and no experience whatsoever, off she set. Wearing a harness taped together with duct tape and some rope, she went up that tree, 180 feet high, to stay on 2 platforms, one 6x8 and one 4x8. After she did this a few times, that December, Julia climbed up Luna again to tree sit for what she expected to last for 3 to 4 weeks. Instead, when the logging company came and set up camp around Luna, she ended up living in that tree for more than 2 years, never setting foot on the ground during that time. She endured extreme cold in the winter, frostbite and 8 snowstorms. She stayed in that tree through rainstorms with the platforms literally bucking around with her on it, lightning hitting so close that she could feel the electricity. She faced threats, air horns, sirens, cajoling. Once a logger by the name of Climbing Dan cut the line that her friend was on. He wasn't hooked in and he fell 2.5 feet, but fortunately he was caught in some branches. Another activist was killed when loggers cut down a tree that fell on him. The loggers tried starving her out until 20 activists swarmed the tree with bags so that some of them would get up to her and they could resupply her food. They tried waiting her out. They had a helicopter fly right above her, which is illegal. She even faced complaints from Earth Firsters, who had put the platforms in the trees and ran the tree sit. They wanted her to get out. They didn't think it was safe for her to stay for the winter. She lived in that tree for 2 years, taking only sponge baths, eating only what you can relay up a tree, going to the bathroom in a bucket. Finally, on December 18th of 1999, a preservation agreement and deed of covenant was documented and recorded to protect Luna and create a 20-foot buffer around her. Later that same day, Hill came down and walked on the ground for the first time in 738 days. As we take a moment to reflect on and honor Julia Butterfly Hill's story, I invite you to join once again in a sung response and sing verse 1 of I Choose Love, In the Midst of Pain. The Reverend Olympia Brown, Representative John Lewis, and Julia Butterfly Hill were born in different times, in different parts of the country. What did these 3 activists have in common that allowed them to persist? Hill, Brown, and Lewis each faced hardship, threats, and scorn. And for both Hill and Lewis, extreme physical danger and the very real possibility of death. They were criticized by both allies and opponents. They were told to go home. They were told that they couldn't succeed. What kept them going? Each clearly felt a passion of purpose, a call to something larger, a deep sense of conviction that they were right and that the stakes were too high for them to walk away. It's clear that they each were probably stubborn, willing to listen to their own inner conscience without being swayed by others, bound and determined not to give up. Each also was supported by community, by family members, by other activists. Each was building on the work of others. Each also had a strong faith. Hill describes praying time and again as she faced her darkest hours. Lewis and Brown both went to theological school and belonged to church communities that sustained them. Perhaps they each learned the wisdom of the tree, which came to Hill as the voice of Luna talking to her during a particularly bad storm when she thought she might die. The trees in the storm don't try to stand up straight and tall and erect. They allow themselves to bend and be blown with the wind. They understand the power of letting go. Those trees and those branches that try too hard to stand up strong and straight are the ones that break. Now is not the time for you to be strong, Julia, or you too will break. Learn the power of the trees. Let it flow. Let it go. That is the only way you are going to make it through this storm. And that is the way to make it through the storms of life. I invite you to join one last time in a sung response, verse 3 of I Choose Love, When My World Falls Down. And now I invite you all to rise in body and or spirit for the hymn Wayaya, number 1020 in the teal hymnals. And please remain standing for our benediction and closing song. Take from life its coals, not its ashes. Fan the flames of love and justice. Join hands and hearts in common endeavor, and there will be no limit to what we can achieve together. Amen. Blessed be. May it ever be so.